if there had been a hair found with root that traced back to an unknown male in that home, I suspect this case would already be solved.
He covered the camera. He wore the mask. He wore the gloves. He spent 3 weeks learning that neighborhood. He knew which cameras to disable and which doors to prop and which route through a dark house took him from the back entrance to the front exit without disturbing a single object. He planned this down to the flower pots on the patio, down to the double layers in 30-degree cold, down to the eyelid tape and the wrong holster and the backpack shaped like nothing. He thought of everything, except the hair. You cannot feel a hair fall. You cannot hear it. You cannot see it leave your body and settle onto a surface in the dark. And at 2 in the morning, inside the home of an 84-year-old woman in the Catalina foothills, somewhere in the course of 40 minutes of adrenaline and physical movement, and a plan that partially fell apart, a single strand of hair drifted loose, off a sleeve, off the edge of a mask, out from under a collar, and it landed somewhere an investigator later thought to swab, and it stayed there. Through the crime scene being released, through vehicles coming and going from that driveway, through 76 days of silence and stalled leads and a mixed DNA sample that nobody could untangle, that hair stayed exactly where it fell, waiting. And now it is inside the FBI laboratory at Quantico. Before we push further, everything you are about to hear comes from publicly available reporting. No suspect has been named, and every piece of expert analysis in this video will be labeled as exactly that. Right now. Tonight. The most advanced forensic facility in the country is running technology on that strand that did not exist in usable casework form 3 years ago. Technology that has already been used to identify a serial killer. Technology that a federal judge has already ruled admissible as trial evidence. Technology that does not require the suspect to be in any database. Technology that does not require their cooperation. Technology that works in complete silence while the person it is hunting has no idea it exists. 76 days. Every lead in this case has collapsed. The glove DNA came back to a restaurant worker. The ransom notes led to an arrested impersonator. The Rio Rico detainee was released without charges. And the mixed DNA sample is still being untangled in a Florida lab, and the timeline on that is 6 more months. Every single thread this investigation has been pulling has either broken or gone cold. And now there is a hair inside the FBI laboratory that the best forensic genealogist in the country just called the first positive thing she has heard in a long time. And she said something else. Something this entire community needs to hear clearly. She said this hair, unlike everything that came before it, could absolutely make this case solvable. This is not another dead end. This is not another glove from a searcher in a field. This is a strand of biological material recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's bedroom, requested by the FBI in February, processed through a Florida lab for 11 weeks, and transferred to Quantico within the last several days. That is now on a completely separate forensic track from every other piece of evidence in this investigation. A track that points at exactly one person. A track with no contamination problem, and no mixture problem, and no 6-month timeline. A track that runs in silence until the day it produces a name. Stay with this. Because what comes next is the most significant forensic development in this case since the first doorbell camera footage was released. And it deserves every second of attention this community can give it. When the news broke on April 16th, it landed quietly. Not with a press conference. Not with a dramatic announcement from the sheriff's podium. With a report from Brian Anton of News Nation, who had confirmed through his sources that DNA evidence from inside Nancy Guthrie's home had been sent to the FBI's own laboratory for advanced analysis, and that the evidence included hairs found in Guthrie's home. Hairs. Not the mixed sample everyone had been hearing about for weeks. Not the contaminated biological material from a crime scene that was released too early and processed too slowly. Hair. A different category of evidence entirely. a separate track that had been developing quietly in the background while the public conversation was entirely focused on the mixed sample and its 6-month timeline. ABC News confirmed the story within hours. Fox News followed, and then the FBI itself, in a rare public statement about a specific active case, issued a short and very deliberate clarification. There was no new DNA evidence in the Nancy Guthrie case, the Bureau said. The FBI had requested this material more than 2 months ago. The Florida lab had been working with it. And 11 weeks later, the original hair sample had been transferred to the FBI laboratory for testing. Read that statement carefully, because 3 details inside it carry enormous weight, and they carry it because the wording of an FBI statement is never accidental. First, the request came from the FBI itself, not from the sheriff's department handing a problem upstream, not from a routine transfer protocol. The Federal Bureau identified a specific piece of evidence in the earliest weeks of this investigation and formally asked for it. That means the FBI had eyes on this hair near the very beginning and made a strategic decision that it wanted that hair in its own building, on its own equipment, in the hands of its own analysts. They were not waiting for it to come to them. They went after it. Second, the Bureau used the word original. They described what they received as an original hair sample. That word, choice, suggests a physically distinct item with its own chain of custody, something separated in the evidence log from the mixed biological material that has been giving the Florida lab so much trouble. Not a portion of the mixed sample sent upstream for a second opinion. A separate piece of evidence on a separate track entirely. The third, the 11-week delay. The request went in more than 2 months ago. The transfer only just completed. That is not how urgent evidence moves in a live kidnapping investigation unless the Florida lab had a specific reason to hold the physical sample before releasing it. The most logical explanation, based on how forensic laboratories handle material in ongoing cases, is that the Florida lab was running its own preliminary analysis on the hair before transferring it, extracting what it could with its own equipment, generating whatever profile was possible, documenting results, preserving enough of the original material for the FBI to conduct its more advanced work on what remained. Hair is not an infinite resource. Once a portion is consumed in testing, it is gone. A lab that knows the Federal Bureau intends to run significantly more powerful analysis on the same strand has every reason to be deliberate about how much of the physical sample it spends up front. 11 weeks of that deliberate process just ended. The hair is at Quantico. And what happens next is where this investigation stops looking like a series of collapsed leads and starts looking like something different entirely. Every lead in this case has dissolved without producing a suspect. The glove, the Rio Rico detainee, the ransom notes, the impersonator, the mixed DNA on a 6-month timeline. One by one, each thread that the public was watching has broken. The hair that is now inside the FBI laboratory was never one of the threads the public was watching. It was developing in the background, quietly, separately. Outside the framework of every public update this investigation has produced. And it arrived at Quantico at the moment when the investigation needed something new most. Here is the distinction that almost every outlet covering this development has missed or underexplained, and it is the most important analytical point in this entire video. So stay with it. For months, the public has been hearing about one DNA problem in the Nancy Guthrie case, a mixed sample. Multiple contributors, biological material from several people intermingled in a way that makes separating them into individual profiles extraordinarily difficult. The Florida lab has been working on that sample. The sheriff has said publicly that untangling it could take another 6 months. The forensic genealogist CeCe Moore has said the software available right now is not successfully resolving it. That is track 1. It is real. It is significant, and it is slow. The hair is track 2, and track 2 has an entirely different set of characteristics. A hair recovered from a surface, from a carpet, from the weave of a chair, from a rug near an entry point, accumulates environmental DNA on the outside of its shaft, skin cells from people who have passed nearby, material from whoever collected it, residue from surfaces the shaft has brushed against. If that hair is dropped directly into an extraction kit without treatment, it will produce a muddled multi-contributor signal that in a raw lab report looks almost identical to a mixed sample. That is the contamination problem. And it is exactly why raw hair evidence often gets dismissed. But there is a protocol for this, a sequence of washes, chemistries calibrated to strip everything off the outside of the shaft without damaging what is inside. Careful drying, microscopic inspection at each stage. The work is meticulous, and the FBI laboratory is one of the most capable places in the world to execute it. When the protocol is complete, what remains is only the hair shaft, and the DNA inside that shaft belongs to exactly one person, the person whose scalp it grew from. CeCe Moore confirmed this directly when Brian Anton asked her. She said the hair is unlikely to be part of the mixed DNA sample. Her reasoning was specific. Once it is cleaned for contamination, and she said they have that process in good shape, a hair shaft does not behave like a mixed sample. It behaves like a single source profile, meaning this evidence will identify exactly one person, not two, not a mixture of several, one. That distinction is the reason this development deserves to be treated as the most significant forensic development in this case since the doorbell footage was released. 2 tracks running simultaneously, both real, both moving forward, but answering different questions on different timelines using different technology. Track 1, the mixed sample, is slow and complicated, and the 6-month timeline stands. Track 2, the hair, is heading toward a single name, and the FBI is running technology on it that the public has barely begun to understand.
Through DNA Labs International, they have their own program to do that. If there had been a hair found with root that traced back to an unknown male in that home, I suspect this case would already be solved. So that leads me to believe it's much more likely it's a rootless hair. Otherwise, it just would have stayed in that lab in Florida.
And remember, they said that there was DNA that was mixed from inside the home, and that was one of the challenges that they were having. How does that fit into this new piece of information? Because like you said, if they have hairs, that's not mixed, right?
Right. It might be contaminated and they have to clean it. And we see that a lot with rootless hair because oftentimes it does have contamination, but it's only on the outside. So they're able to clean that and get past that to the DNA of the person who had that hair on their head. So the mixed sample would just be a completely different sample.
Okay.
So this is what I've been talking about a lot, was the hope that they had dozens or hundreds of other pieces of evidence that they were processing, or maybe went back and found after the first DNA collection, because that mixed sample is going to take some time, clearly, based on what we've heard. And so I was hopeful there might be something else that would pop up in this case that could be a faster way of identifying this person. So I think these are two completely separate things.
CeCe Moore has been the most important forensic voice in the public coverage of this case. She is a senior investigative genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs. She has a long and thoroughly documented history of resolving cases exactly like this one. When she says something is the first positive thing she has heard in a long time, that is not a throwaway comment. That is a professional assessment from someone who has been watching this forensic landscape closely for decades and who understands precisely what the arrival of hair evidence at the FBI laboratory means, and what it means depends on whether the hair has a root. Moore was specific about this. If the hair has a follicle attached, a root. The processing pathway is fast and direct. Extract, generate a profile, upload, compare. If there had been a root, this case would likely already be solved because a rooted hair produces a standard single-source DNA profile that any competent lab can work with. The Florida lab would have had it months ago. Moore's assessment, based on the fact that the hair went to Florida first and the case is still unsolved, is that this is almost certainly rootless hair, a hair shaft without a follicle. And 3 years ago, that distinction would have been devastating. Because 3 years ago, rootless hair was forensically useless for genetic genealogy. The nuclear DNA simply was not present in recoverable quantities. Laboratories could extract mitochondrial DNA from a hair shaft, but mitochondrial DNA is inherited only through the maternal line. It is shared by entire family lineages. It can rule people out, but it cannot uniquely identify a specific individual. For decades, that was the ceiling. Then Dr. Ed Green and his team at Estrella Forensics broke through it. They developed a methodology to extract a SNP profile, a single nucleotide polymorphism profile, from the shaft of a rootless hair. SNP profiles are the genetic fingerprints that genetic genealogy runs against consumer ancestry databases, against the millions of voluntary submissions sitting in 23 and Me and Ancestry, DNA, and GED match from people who were simply curious about their heritage and had no idea they were building the infrastructure that would one day identify a kidnapper. The FBI used this exact technology in the Gilgo Beach murder case. Rex Heuermann evaded identification for over a decade. The hair analysis using this methodology was one of the things that helped zero in on him, and a federal judge was prepared to allow that evidence at trial. That is not a theoretical possibility sitting in a research paper. It is a proven forensic pathway that the FBI has already walked successfully and that a court has already validated as admissible evidence. And now the FBI has a hair from inside Nancy Guthrie's home running through that same pathway, inside the same laboratory, using the same technology, in a case that has been running for 76 days without producing a single publicly named suspect. Moore called it a Hail Mary, and in the same breath, she said it could absolutely make this case solvable. Both of those things are true simultaneously. It is a Hail Mary because hair evidence is not guaranteed to produce a viable profile. The shaft has to contain enough nuclear DNA. The contamination cleaning has to work. The SNP extraction has to yield enough markers to build a usable profile. None of that is certain. But it is a Hail Mary thrown by the FBI laboratory at Quantico using technology that has already identified a serial killer. And in 76 days of a case that has produced nothing but collapsed leads, that is not a small thing. That is the best shot this investigation has had since the first doorbell footage was analyzed. The reason the Gilgo Beach case matters so much to understanding what is happening in the Nancy Guthrie investigation right now is that it established something forensically and legally that did not exist before it. It proved in a real case, with a real arrest and a real courtroom, that SNP profiles extracted from rootless hair are not only scientifically viable, they are legally defensible. A judge ruled the evidence admissible. The prosecution was preparing to use it at trial. Rex Heuermann was not caught because he was careless. He was careful. He evaded law enforcement for over a decade while living an ordinary life in an ordinary community. He was not in CODIS. He had no criminal record that would have placed his DNA in a searchable database. The technology that identified him worked by building outward from his own biology through distant relatives he had never met, people who had submitted their DNA to consumer ancestry services without any knowledge of what they were contributing to. The family tree that resulted pointed at one specific branch, and that branch pointed at one specific man. That is the path the hair from Nancy Guthrie's home is now on. Not a guaranteed path, not a fast path, but a proven path that the FBI has already traveled and that courts have already validated. And the person at the end of that path, whoever shed that hair inside an 84-year-old woman's bedroom at 2 a.m. in February, has no way of knowing the path exists, has no way of knowing that a strand they cannot remember losing is sitting inside a laboratory right now, having its deepest genetic architecture mapped by analysts who are not going to stop until that architecture produces a name. Now, when ABC News and News Nation published their reporting, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos posted a single paragraph on social media. "This is not new information," the department wrote. "The private lab we utilize in Florida continues to share information with the FBI lab and other partner labs across the country. DNA analysis remains ongoing." That is all. One paragraph. Administrative language. No press conference, no elaboration, no excitement, no public statement welcoming what any reasonable observer would frame as the most significant forensic development in this case since the doorbell footage. Think about what that means for a man who is currently facing an active recall effort, whose own deputies have voted unanimously no confidence, whose county board moved to compel him to answer questions under oath. He whose handling of the original crime scene was described by a former United States Surgeon General as permanently corrupted. In ordinary circumstances, a sheriff presiding over a nationally watched case would be front and center for any development that could be framed as progress. He would be at a podium. He would be expressing confidence. He would be showing the county that the investigation he is responsible for is moving in the right direction. Nanos posted one paragraph on social media and went quiet. And the question of whether that flatness reflects genuine institutional restraint, a request from the FBI not to elaborate publicly on active forensic work, or something else entirely, is one that reasonable observers can disagree about, but the posture is notable. And in a case where every piece of silence has carried its own information, the sheriff's muted response to what the forensic community is calling the first genuinely positive development in weeks deserves to be registered. What we know is that approximately 24 Pima County and FBI investigators remain actively assigned to this case. What we know is that the FBI requested this hair in February and that the Bureau does not formally request specific pieces of evidence from a partner lab without having already assessed that evidence as potentially significant. What we know is that the technology being applied to it has already cracked a case that law enforcement had been unable to solve for over a decade. And what we know is that the investigation has never been more quiet or more active simultaneously than it is right now. This channel does not present speculation as fact, and the honest version of where this development stands right now requires saying clearly what is confirmed and what is not. We do not know whether the hair has a root or not. We do not know which room of Nancy Guthrie's home it was recovered from. We do not know whether the cleaning protocol will produce a viable profile or whether the shaft contains enough recoverable nuclear DNA for a usable SNP extraction. We do not know how long the FBI's analysis will take. Moore said her experience with rootless hair is that the process can take many months and sometimes requires multiple attempts. We do not know whether a profile, if extracted, will produce a CODIS hit or require the longer genetic genealogy pathway. And we do not know what the FBI knows because the Bureau has confirmed almost nothing about the trajectory of this investigation beyond the bare minimum required by public accountability. What we do know is this: a named forensic expert with a documented history of closing cases like this one called the hair the first positive thing she has heard in a long time. She said it could absolutely make the case solvable. She identified the technology being used as the same technology that helped identify Rex Hoyerman and that a federal judge has already ruled admissible as trial evidence. And she drew a clear distinction between this evidence and the mixed sample, confirming that once cleaned, this hair will point at exactly one person rather than producing the multi-contributor problem that has been the wall in this investigation for months. And that is the honest picture. Not a guarantee, not a solved case, but the most structurally significant development in 76 days of an investigation that has been defined by collapsed leads and institutional failure. A second genuine path forward running in parallel to everything else. Inside the most advanced forensic laboratory in the country. On technology, the suspect has no reason to know exists. Come back to the person on that porch. Because understanding what the hair represents requires understanding how carefully that person tried to prevent exactly this moment. He covered the camera. He wore a full face mask. He wore gloves on both hands. He researched the cameras and the network and the layout of the property before he arrived. He wore double layers in cold weather. He may have taped his eyelids to alter his appearance on footage he intended to leave behind. He used flower pots from the patio he had memorized to prop 3 separate access points. He spent 3 Saturday nights in January confirming that the operational window he was planning around was still exactly where he needed it. He thought of everything that a careful, meticulous person who had studied this target for weeks would think of. He did not think about the hair. Because you cannot think about the hair. You cannot feel it leave your body. You cannot hear it settle onto a surface in the dark. In the course of 40 minutes of physical movement through a house, reaching, lifting, carrying, moving through doorways, navigating furniture in the dark, the human body sheds biological material constantly and invisibly. Yes, there is no protocol for preventing it that does not require a full forensic hazmat suit. And a person moving through a residential home at 2 in the morning is not wearing a forensic hazmat suit. They are wearing a ski mask and double layers and gloves and whatever else the costume required. And somewhere in the ordinary physics of a body moving through a confined space, a single strand of hair detached from wherever it was and landed on a surface that an investigator later decided was worth examining. From the suspect's perspective, that hair does not exist. It never registered. It was not a decision or a mistake or an oversight. It was invisible. It was the one detail that no amount of preparation can fully prevent. And it is now inside the FBI laboratory at Quantico, being processed by technology that the suspect has no reason to know has been deployed against them. That asymmetry, what the investigation knows versus what the suspect knows, is the quiet center of what this development means. The glove was found in a field and led nowhere. The ransom notes led to an arrested impersonator. The mixed DNA is moving slowly toward a 6-month timeline. And the hair that nobody was talking about has been quietly making its way from a Florida lab to Quantico for 11 weeks, while the suspect has been living their life completely unaware that the one detail they could not control is in the hands of the most capable forensic institution in the world. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She has been missing for 76 days. Her family cannot grieve. They can only wait. And inside the FBI laboratory at Quantico, a strand of hair that was shed without awareness in the dark of an early February morning is being processed by technology that has already identified a serial killer and that a federal judge has already ruled can walk into a courtroom. The suspect covered everything they could cover. They planned everything they could plan. And the one detail they could not prevent, the one piece of evidence that was invisible to them at the moment it was created, is now in the most capable forensic hands in the country, running on technology they do not know exists, moving toward a name they do not know is being built. Share this video for Nancy. Every share keeps this case in front of someone who might know something. Every like tells the algorithm this case still matters. I'd subscribe so the next update reaches you the moment it breaks. Because the person responsible for what happened on February 1st is counting on the world moving on, and the world has not moved on. Here is the question this video ends with. CeCe Moore, the best forensic genealogist in the country, said the hair could absolutely make this case solvable. She also said it is a Hail Mary, both true at the same time. So the question for this community is this: If the FBI extracts a clean single-source male profile from this hair and it matches no one in CODIS, and they move to genetic genealogy, how long do you think it takes before someone in that family tree leads investigators back to the person who was inside Nancy Guthrie's home on the night of February 1st? Because the Golden State Killer took 4 months once that process started. And this case is not cold. It is 76 days old and it is very much alive.